So I have the honor and privilege to introduce one of my absolute favorite people in the world, and who is my personal hero because she is just a force to reckon with. Claire Jimenez is a Puerto Rican writer who grew up in Brooklyn and Staten Island, New York. She is the author of the short story collection Staten Island Stories, produced by Johns Hopkins Press, December 2019. For which she received the 2019 Hornblower Award for a first book from the New York Society Library. I highly recommend you go out and get this book. It is funny as I don't know what. Claire is also a doctoral student in English with a concentration in ethnic studies and digital humanities at the University of Puerto Rican. She received her MFA from Vanderbilt University. And before I talk about the project, I just on a personal note want to say that this project starts at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the coffee house, which is on O Street, when Claire said, I want to do digital humanities, but I don't really know how to get a start. And we had a whole conversation about that and about applying for grants. And one of the grants she applied for was the Grants and Aid that she eventually got to start the Puerto Rican Literature Project, which is a digital archive that maps the literary production of Puerto Rican writers from the archipelago and the diaspora since the Jones Act. It contains various photos, ephemera, and images of manuscripts in progress, some of which are housed at the archive at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, where a portion of this project began as a summer fellowship, which was the first grant Claire applied for. And then the second grant was Grant and Aid. The third grant she has now received is a $1.4 million grant for over 3 years from the Mellon Foundation to continue this work with Poet Laureate Raquel Salas Rivera, Ricky Maldonado, and Enrique Pesante Olivares. I hope I got that right. Without further ado, I introduce my—
And USLDH too.
And USLDH.
Yeah, that's a big part.
Sorry, it's such a bad habit. Without further ado, I introduce Claire Jimenez.
Oh man, I'm so glad, Linda, I love Linda. I'm so glad that you started because I have you inside of my presentation, Linda. So this is perfect. So, okay. I'm going to share, because literally it is not an underestimation or like, it's not me, it's not me being hyperbolic when I say that being part of USLDH changed my life. It absolutely changed everything career-wise and personally, and I'm forever grateful to USLDH for investing their time inside of this project and for putting up with all of our shenanigans and for loving us and loving this project and making it work. So I'm going to show you a little bit about our project, but I thought I first start with my own relationship with digital humanities or even actually maybe going back with technology. And yeah, so we'll start there. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Oh, my bad. There we go. All right, let me move you guys' heads out. Okay, there we go. So like my own path in digital humanities started in 2010 when I was getting my MFA at Vanderbilt, and somebody had mentioned digital humanities. Oh, I heard this professor, Jay Clayton, being like, I don't know why nobody is interested in digital humanities. And I was like, that's because I don't know what that is. I don't care. I'm a writer. It has nothing to do with me. But that was the first time I actually heard of something called digital humanities, and I didn't really understand it. Me and actually Vero, who's a part of this group, we've talked about this before. It was only until I came to Nebraska and I met Linda where I actually understood what that was, and what was possible. And I'm going to actually start with the fact that I had a very complicated relationship with technology growing up. So my past experiences, I went to this specialized school in New York. It was a high school, it was a public school, but you had to like test to get in it, right? And so it was like one of 4 tech schools inside of New York. And I got in, but I hated it. There was only, I think maybe 4 or 5 students of color in the whole grade. All of my teachers were white, most of them were male. I would learn C++ or CAD, and I didn't really care because it didn't seem like it had anything to do with me. And that kind of killed any interest or joy around technology for me. I just, became a writer. And when I came to Nebraska and I met Linda, she's the one that really developed my love for this field and what it can do. I wanted to talk a little bit, this is a slide from an older presentation, because we were talking about like what are the things that sort of prevent, people and scholars of color from engaging inside of technology. And for me, I think it's a combination of a need for mentorship, but people who are patient and don't make you feel dumb. And people who are loving and believe inside of your mission, which is what you have with USLDH. They will work so hard for you and for your projects, really. I mean, they're amazing. And I think personally, Linda, a few years ago, I guess it's many years ago now, Linda, I can't even believe it. It's like 3, almost 4 years ago, was the one who sat down and, and was patient with me. And I would ask questions like, what's a SIM card? And she'd be like, oh Lord, what is wrong with this girl? But in a loving way. And she helped me buy a computer. She helped me pick out different equipment I needed. This was all before I even dreamt of getting any grant. The other thing I'll say is that I think that one of the other barriers is that there needs to be a real reason or motive behind the technology or I think to engage like more students and people of color inside of DH, that it actually has to be like this organic reason why they want to come to the project, as opposed to like, I think of myself as a 15-year-old girl at Staten Island Tech learning C++, right? Like, and having to, I don't know, make a circle or something. It just didn't seem like it was very interesting to me. I started to talk to Linda a lot because I was a writer. I talked a lot about the fact that it was so wild to me that there weren't a lot of Puerto Rican writers published in the Big Five. So the Big Five would be like Random House, Simon Schuster, all those other folks, and basically Penguin, right? And I kind of began with this question that probably started when I was a teenager, roaming through bookstores, about like, why aren't there more books by Puerto Rican writers that are accessible? And as I went into my PhD program, this was a question that I had chosen for my research, for my comprehensive exams, but also just in it was a larger inquiry I had in my life as somebody who writes literature. And so I was reading Juan Flores's Divided Borders, and I came across this brilliant essay called Puerto Rican Literature in the United States, Stages and Perspectives. And he says, after nearly a century of intense economic, and this is written in the 90s, and one of the things I argue is that this is still very much true today. After nearly a century of intense economic and political association, endless official pledges of cultural kinship, and the whole importation of nearly half of the Puerto Rican people to the United States, Puerto Rican literature still draws a blank among American readers and students of literature. Major writers and authors are unknown, and with a handful of exceptions, untranslated. English language and bilingual anthologies are few and unsystematic, and there's still not a single introduction to the literature's history available in English. Even the writing of Puerto Ricans living in the United States, mostly in English and all expressive of life in this country, has remained marginal to any literary canon, mainstream or otherwise. And then I have a statistic down here just so that you can understand how sort of white the publishing industry is. Overall, the last survey from Lee and Lowe showed that it's 76% white. When we look at editorial, when they surveyed editors, they found that it was higher. It was in, I think in the mid 80s. And so this matters because what it means is that the acquiring editors are choosing, right, like what they want to publish. And if you have a certain amount of cultural values in which you find certain stories relatable and certain stories not, and you don't have diverse editors, what usually happens, and this is a story you all I know probably know, is that you have whiter books, right? You have more books by white authors as opposed to other people. As I was thinking about this, one of the, and talking to Linda, I started to think about like, what would happen if, you know, I could create something that can sort of map the history of Puerto Rican literature to build more awareness around our books and our authors. You know, I thought about the 15-year-old girl, you know, in New York looking for Puerto Rican books and not being able to find anything, right? Inside of her local Barnes and Nobles or whatever. Back then in the 90s, it was, I think it was like B. Dalton, right? But and one of the things that Linda explained to me was that it's possible by doing things like digital tools. I think she showed me story maps. We talked about digital archives. I'd already been really interested in her work with Chicana Pomirasa, which is an amazing digital archive. If you've not seen it, you need to go see it. Linda, Maria Cotera, Marco, they're wonderful scholars in digital humanists, and they have this really, it's a really great archive. You have to check it out. And so I was inspired by Linda's work. And as I was talking to her, she was like, you know, you could probably do something like this, right? Dealing with Puerto Rican literature. And the first, so the first iteration of this was that I applied for a grant at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. And Linda sat with me and we talked about what would this be? What would this grant be, you know? And so we worked on a cover letter, and I had started off, so I just highlighted some of the parts. My goal is to create a shareable, user-friendly, free digital map that anybody could access on the internet to learn more about present day and past Puerto Rican literature. This work is partially inspired by that of my colleague, Linda Garcia Merchat, and her digital archive, Chicana Pomirasa, for which her partner, Maya Volk, uses the tool, or student, I think I had to edit that part, uses the tool story maps to geographically track the Chicana movement throughout time. And so that was like sort of the seed of all of this, right? When I went to Centro, well, first, before I even went to Centro, talking about that coffee shop, and let me just make sure I'm good on time. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna take like 3 more minutes, and then we can do questions. But at the coffee shop, Linda sort of started to teach me, not sort of, taught me how do you scan? How do you keep folders and files on your phone? How do you do audio recordings? You know, here's an app you can use. How do you go into an archive with a plan? You know, originally I think I would show her, she's like, okay, look through their finding aids and find how many boxes they have, right? Oh, because I ended up getting the grant, right? And so she was walking me through what to do when I got there. And I would come back to her with like 22 boxes, and she'd be like, you're not going to be able to look through 22 boxes in a day, Claire. That's not possible. I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, yeah. And so things that was sort of my beginning in thinking about like, how do you do archival work? And so one of the greats, there are so many treasures at Centro. So for example, there was this one by a local poet who was actually from Puerto Rico, but was working inside of New York. And she was also an artist. So she had drawn, she had created this book cover art. And this is a manuscript that's not available online or for sale. Like many types of Puerto Rican books, often you find that they're out of print or they're not accessible, and they're kind of sitting in these boxes, right, like inside of archives. And even if they're open to the community, you know, maybe the community doesn't think about going into an archive, or you know, or doesn't think, oh, I'm going to go search through all these, you know, files and letters, right? And so this is where the digital has so much power. I also found things like this Victor Fragoso draft, which was really gorgeous to me. Victor Fragoso was a queer poet, originally from PR, but moved to New York and then Jersey. He died of AIDS in the 80s. He was one of the first cases and they had mistaken it as cancer. And so it was, I mean, his story is both tragic, but also triumphant to me. And these are things, again, his books are out of print. I think he has, I know he has an anthology of plays at a centro right now, but his actual poetry books are not accessible. You know, they're passed in PDFs from different scholars. This is a picture of Jorge Brandon. He's a poet that was mostly like a street poet. He fled Puerto Rico after a massacre and went to New York to lived mostly in the streets, but is largely known to inspire the New Yorker poetry movement. So eventually I talked to Linda again, and she's like, and I was like, should I apply for this, or is this like for experts? And she was like, you should definitely apply for this. Give me a second. Sorry, guys. I got this cough. Hopefully not COVID, I hope. And so I linked up with this poet, Raquel Salas-Rivera, and he had won the National Book Award, or he was a semifinalist, and I hooked up with Ricardo Maldonado as well. I might have to take a break. I'm so sorry, but I'm like a little sick, but can I take 2 minutes?
Yes, of course.
Let me share real quick. I'm gonna speak because I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to get to the point where, so that you could see the site, and then you can see what we came up with. So basically what happened was we were awarded the grant, the USLDH one, and we dealt with the complications of COVID, right? So we were working on dealing with, our travel plans had been stopped, so we had to think of something different. And so we thought about doing this Puerto Rico Mi Corazón exhibit. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of that. And then I think, see. So we ended up using Omeka. And this exhibit is of poets that were writing poems for Puerto Rico. They're really gorgeous. So for example, we have them, here's one author. By using Omeka, we were able to take advantage of these Dublin Court categories. And also their geolocation feature. So you can zoom in and actually see where in Puerto Rico this poet is from. And so we have one of her, the poem is both in English and Spanish.
Busco refugio en tus imaginarios, para que haya aurora. Busco refugio en tus imaginarios, espejos ojeados, esquinas ramificadas.
And then in English.
I seek refuge in your imaginaries. I seek refuge in your imaginaries. Leave mirrors, benched edges.
So we were lucky enough to get quite a few of the poets inside the anthology to feature them. And that sort of took the place of the work inside of the archives. And the last thing I'm going to show you real quick is, so Neatline is being weird today. It's down. Oh, this is TI, but I'm not going to show that to you actually. I want to show you this. So we also created a Neatline map, a Puerto Rican literary production that we put next to historical moments. And so this was something that was a pain in the butt to do, but I'm very grateful that we did it. And now we're looking at different ways to digitally map the literary production and historical events. All right, and then we got a Mellon grant because of USLDH, because they're amazing. I'm going to stop here because I'm struggling for breath. If anybody has questions, you could ask questions, or we could call it a day.
Congratulations, Claire.
I would say that you, just because you don't have words, your work speaks for itself, Claire.
it is empowering to see all that work that what started as a little seed, right? And like Claire, I really love how you anchor this in commenting about how maybe the calling at the earlier was not right there for you, but it had to be tied to something that was empowering your work, which was questioning, like, where are all those Latino voices, those Puerto Rican voices that should be featured, right? Which is you are decolonizing this space, questioning, interrogating these narratives that we are fed into. And so, I mean, you're using you're a true, writer, true, ¿cómo se dice? Like, me recuerda mucho a José Martí, ¿no? Que toma la herramienta, ¿verdad? La pluma para escribir, para luchar. And this is what I see through this work here. It is foundational. Again, it is empowering. I mean, the now you see that other grant that that is part of this project, and it's just gonna keep on giving and showing that there's a legacy that like I'll say one more thing, which is what Lilia reminded us today. We're constantly being told that we're scars. But on the contrary, we are not. This is we're not in, coming from scarcity. There's a lot of material. There is so much wealth there. It's just been erased. So thank you, Claire. Mis respetos.
Thank you guys. I'm so excited for all of you other folks that get to work with them for another year. They're amazing.